Welcome to the Pacesetter Pod, where we explore and reveal the perspectives, insights, and approaches to deliver great results and growth in your agribusiness through better execution. Here's your host, the Integration Pacesetter, Joe Mosier.
Welcome, Pacesetters of Agribusiness, to another episode of the Pacesetter Pod. I am your host, Joe Mosier, and I'm thrilled that you chose to spend your time with us today. A quick reminder before today's episode. If you haven't done so already, now is a great time to subscribe to the podcast. It's the best way to ensure that you never miss any of the content or the conversations that we publish each week to help you deliver better results in your agribusiness through better strategy execution. Now, for today's episode, we're going to be talking about trucking and freight. Anyone who has spent any time in ag or in agribusiness knows that there is very little generally to get excited about when it comes to the freight aspects of the business. You know, things like connecting with haulers, if you're a shipper, negotiating price, verifying hauler qualifications and credentials, securing the freight, tracking it, verifying delivery. It is messy and it is fraught with friction. And for the hauler or for the broker, it isn't much better either. Things like paper scale tickets, awaiting records so that you can actually issue invoices, then awaiting payment, managing all the expensive depreciating rolling stock that you have in the business. It is just a painful, messy, complex set of activities that makes it very hard to deliver profitable long-term results and growth over time. So today I'm really excited to share a conversation that I recently had with Jared Flinn of BulkLoads. BulkLoads is the largest bulk trucking marketplace in North America that connects thousands of bulk freight truckers and shippers in real time. In our conversation, Jared's going to walk us through the inception story of the business, which is fascinating. He's going to talk about how it has evolved, how the initial product has ultimately become the biggest funnel in the business. He'll unpack some of the potential and the limits of autonomy in bulk freight hauling, and then also some of the implications of the rapid advancements in AI for digital marketplaces like BulkLoads and for the trucking industry in general. You know, as part of this program, I get to spend time with a lot of people, and I love sitting down and talking with people like Jared, those creative souls that are looking at the stubborn friction in a business and are trying to build a solution around that friction and then doing it again and again and again. And it's even better when those same people are also willing to be so generous with their reflections and offer their perspectives for the benefit of the ag industry. And so I'm really excited to have had the time with Jared and to be able to share it with you today. And so without any further ado, here's my conversation with Jared Flinn of BulkLoads. Jared, good to see you today. Welcome to the Pacesetter Pod.
Joe, it's an honor to be with you.
This is a conversation I'm looking forward to. You know, we'll talk about it a little bit later here, but you're a podcaster yourself, and so you understand the power and the opportunity of sharing perspectives and platforms like this. And so it's nice to have you on. But before we get to that later down the road, let's talk about BulkLoads. Who are you guys? What do you do? And kind of give us the breadcrumbs to the origin of the business.
Yeah, so the elevator pitch I have for BulkLoads, we are a marketplace for the bulk freight commodity market. We help trucking companies, specifically bulk haulers, find loads. And when you look at like bulk truck freight, we're primarily focused on hopper bottoms, in dumps, walk-in floors, pneumatics, even tankers, but anything that's going to be kind of bulk raw commodity related that goes in a truck, those are our clients. Typically more on the agriculture side, where we've kind of focused primarily because of my background being in agriculture, but we do industrial stuff as well. So, but yeah, if you're thinking of a bulk raw commodity, whether that be some kind of grain, feed ingredient, fertilizer, but even aggregates, sand, rock, gravel, landscape materials, those are the types of truck freight that we deal with. So we created a marketplace, or the generic terms a load board, where we're matchmaking that carrier, introducing them to that shipping company. And it can be on the flip side too, depending on the market, but helping that shipping company find that trucking company.
And, you know, I'm kind of surprised, I guess maybe the naivete of the market is why new businesses can get created, because everyone else figures that already exists. But the idea of this digital marketplace, this load board, if you will, so I presume that did not exist specifically within the ag or bulk commodity space prior to bulk loads, or kind of how did you happen upon saying this is something that's underserved or unserved and we need to get after it?
Yeah, so we didn't reinvent the wheel. Or so we, I mean, there was already boards out there, typically in the general space. So a lot of over-the-road carriers and companies know that there was boards like DAT and Truck Stop that existed, and there was even one in our space that was existed. But we just saw that with technology coming on, how can we continue to improve that connection, that digitization of technology to bring that carrier better with them. So I guess I was going to say, yeah, we didn't invent the iPhone, but we've created more functionality to it and adaptability.
Okay. Very good. So for our listeners, it's unlikely to be a surprise that the idea of, finding reliable, qualified, and also available and affordable haulers for a given product going from point A to point B is a challenge. But let's kind of step back for a moment. What can you tell us about the truck industry overall? I think there's certainly when I was driving with the kids back from Chicagoland last weekend, and I'm sitting here thinking about this conversation, and I'm looking at all the trailers as we're going, right? And a bunch of them there's Amazon trucks, of course, these branded trailers for Amazon. You got a couple of the big majors, but then there's a lot of one-offs or seemingly one-off haulers. So what is the degree of consolidation versus fragmentation in this market in that justifies something like a digital marketplace and a load board being value additive for the shippers and for the haulers?
Yeah, well, maybe I can just step back a little bit of my story and how that relates to how I kind of stepped into the truck space. But I grew up on a farm in eastern Missouri, and there was a little bit of, row crop area that we were in eastern Missouri, but went to the University of Missouri. But then my first really big job when I got out was working for a large grain trading company. And even prior to that, I had obviously some farm ag experience, graduated with an ag degree, but also I had a little bit of trucking experience. I drove a delivery truck, had my Class A CDL. So I kind of knew that. I wasn't an over the road trucker, but didn't know that like the overall space. But I go to work for this large grain trading company in 2005. And my job was, and like most grain trading companies, was like, hey, we're going to get you, your job is to book trucks. You're going to be the truck jockey is what the senior level manager called me. Like, you're going to go out and call trucks and help them move freight. Well, so my first job, I was working behind the wheat desk at Bartlett Grain Company. And I remember the first week on the job, they give me a clipboard with a list of origins and kind of rates. And then they also gave me it was a binded, stapled pack of carriers. And they're like, start calling these carriers and see if you can get these loads booked. And still, I had no idea what 33 cents a bushel meant on freight, on wheat freight. But anyways, I started kind of studying the market and started calling these trucking companies. And as slowly did I learn that, and the trucking space is severely fragmented. And again, like you said, your everyday people, when they think of trucking, they think of the orange trucks on the road, the Schneiders or the JB Hunts or the Swifts or the Warners. Here where we are in Springfield, there's a mega one called Prime. But if you look at those companies and really total all those trucking companies together, those big mega carriers, they're only like 7% of the whole trucking industry, So that other 93%, to my surprise, it's these small owner operators. And that was the list that I had at Bartlett Grain. It was calling these 1 to 2 truck operators. Some have 5, and there's some that go to 20, 50 trucks. But that the density was really that 5 or less trucking outfit. And so I slowly realized that, man, this is super fragmented, but also there's a lot of opportunity here. And in that time too, and I hate to say, I don't want to cast Bartlett, but like trucking was a bad word. When I worked at Bartlett. It was something that people didn't want to deal with. They knew that it was messy, that it was complicated, that there was always issues trying to find a truck, negotiating rates, things breaking down, not getting stuff delivered. Well, I looked at that and I was like, that seems like a heck of a good opportunity to me, where there's issues like that. And I just started realizing that like, hey, this was an undervalued industry. that was like the most valuable or essential part of grain movement. Everything's got to start and, usually starts and ends on a truck, getting it off the farm to the elevator, to the feed mill, to the terminal, feedlots. You can go through the ranks. So anyways, I started studying the market and really realizing just how fragmented it was. And at that time too, I started in 2005. Well, 2008, the little device called the iPhone was introduced. We think that it was even longer ago than that, but it wasn't. I mean, that's been less than 20 years ago at the iPhone. But we started realizing that, man, this digital revolution of trying to match make carriers with loads was kind of coming. And again, I said early on, my job was, outbound calling these carriers. I start realizing, man, if I could start using technology to enhance that process. And even before, the load board, I started working with developers at Bartlett Grain. I can still remember going downstairs, where the devs were, and it was like uncharted territory. Nobody stepped foot down there, especially not merchandisers and not guys. I started going down there, and there was a lady named Carolyn, and I started talking to her, and she had actually started designing, or she started working with the merchandising group kind of in the infancy stages, kind of designing kind of a truck logistics program. But I started talking with her. I was like, man, are there ways that we can continue to just make this process easier? And one of the first things we did was we started figuring out a way hey, we can actually text carriers instead of calling them. And I can send them a quick little message saying, hey, I got 50 loads in Seneca, Kansas going to Kansas City. Call me if you're interested. Well, now, instead of me having to cold call 50 trucking companies, I just sent a blanket text out to all of them. And then the ones that were interested would call me back, and, we would get the loads booked. So that was the very first, testing that I did to say, hey, could we use some technology and digitization to do this? Well, then I started looking okay, what are those other methods of communicating with trucking companies? Well, obviously, there was text, there was email, but you could even put loads out on a marketplace or a board and then wait for those carriers to find the opportunities to move. So that's really where my head kind of started going to say, hey, there's an opportunity to create a load board in this space. So I'll pause there. I kind of went really deep, but that was kind of my method of how I saw the opportunity to create a load board to meet those demands that the industry had.
Well, I think that's great. Thank you for going deep on that. Two interesting things. One thing you said pretty early on there was that trucking was a dirty word. And it was sort of this, and this is true, but it was an accepted friction within the business. We know first mile, last mile is going to be over the road on a truck in most cases. And it's a fragmented market. It's sometimes unreliable. The carriers either don't show up, or they're not available the day that we need them, or something changes. Some of the carriers locally might be farmers, and they just happen to have one or two extra trucks. And there's just all this friction. And what happens over time is that you get comfortable with it, and you almost accept it as, well, that's just simply an operational cost, as well as a financial cost of being in this business. And I think there's so much power, and this is nothing new here, but I think it's important to restate. There's so much power in saying, let's reverse engineer this and say, does this friction actually need to exist? Is it a creature of familiarity and momentum, or is it actually a technical problem that cannot be solved? And most of the time, when you answer that, when you look at that, they're usually not technical problems that cannot be solved. It might be a technical problem that you can't afford to solve because the technology's not there yet, the demand's not there yet, the value in play is not greater than the cost of getting there. But always looking, saying, okay, this is friction. Does it have to exist, or have we just simply accepted it? Is really important. The other thing I think is interesting too is, in doing so, you're just enabling the existing sort of communication flow. So it's still demand driven. We have demand for freight. It's driven by the shipper.
Yep.
And now you've created an opportunity where those folks that have the freight, that have the supply, are able to opt into a marketplace, monitor, and select their loads. I'm guessing, not only, it's additive for the shipper, because they're able to broadcast their freight demands more broadly, including to folks that they might not otherwise be familiar with or have worked with in the past. But it's also simplified demand gen for these haulers who maybe are sitting there twiddling their thumbs. They call a few of their regular shippers, and no one's got demand that week. but now they got another place to go. So you're kind of serving a value on both sides of that transaction, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And there's so many different scenarios. So, trucking, you may be busy one week and then you get rained out the next week and now you got to find freight. I mean, there's so many inconsistencies. I can give you several different scenarios. So our goal is to help find that initial carrier that company can continue to use. So really match make or introduce them. But, there's, let the cat out of the bag. Once you find that connection, you got the connection. When people are always like, well, Jared, that's a bad business because now you've just made those people. But the thing is, the freight always changes. The flow of those you move, demand, it could be weather related stuff and, drought related, or the market influx is tariff related. So trucking is constantly moving. It's kind of like the economy, but it's this ball that's constantly rolling down the hill and you're trying to contain it. So yeah, the thing is your shippers are always needing new carriers. Carriers are always needing to find new contacts. Carriers may be taking a one-off load somewhere where they need to find a load to get out of there. That's where we serve a purpose. A shipper may have an oddball load that goes somewhere that they're core carriers. So you can role play so many different scenarios. So we're trying to fill that gap of that ever-changing cycle of freight.
That was a question I was going to ask is, how do you, for folks that are introduced on your platform or in the marketplace and then subsequently form very close business relationships that you no longer participate in if they're not going via the board, that does seem ostensibly like you're sowing the seeds of your own destruction. But anybody who's been in the business for more than 10 minutes knows that there's always an emerging need for marriages between shippers and haulers. Thinking that scenario of someone who typically is hauling from point A to point B for 80% of their hauling needs, but then suddenly they have an opportunity to run a different route, different product, different volumes, etc., to a new destination. This solves for that. It also solves for the hauler that may say, I don't typically deliver up there. What can I get as a backhaul as well? I presume that that might be a little more of a complicated use case, but then a hauler can say, okay, look, I'm going to take it from Seneca to KC. I don't usually go in and out of Seneca. What can I bring into Seneca prior to this backhaul into KC, and kind of solving for it in that end as well?
Yeah, 100% on all those situations. Like you said, freight it's always changing. The market's always flowing. And and again, you got to think you got all these loads, all these carriers, and just constantly kind of moving back and forth. And you get especially in our industry, I mean, you get the high and low demands, but if you got to think about our industry, agriculture and farming, you get your big pushes. So you get, spring planting and big fertilizer pushes. You got wheat pushes, summer harvest pushes, all obviously these big pushes. So there's just always these constant injections. You even mentioned earlier, one thing that's unique about our industry that's different than any other trucking is we also have a farmer injection at times of the year. So think about this, dry vans and reefers, you don't have these farmers all of a sudden I'm using these for harvest. Now I don't need them. Now I'm going to put those back on the market. I mean, there may be some weird scenarios, but hoppers and some of these other bulk trailers, those are ones all of a sudden they're used in the harvest months. Well, then that farmer wants to utilize them in the off months. So then he pushes that out there. Well, that puts pressure on the market and all these other commercial haulers, which can have, again, negative effects on the carrier side because now there's more capacity out there, drives costs down. So that's another one that we see that's very unique to our industry.
I mean, it really is consistently load balancing the supply and the demand of the freight, really. And it just made me think of back in my grain days, some of our farmers that were the first ones to complain when we started to get a little bit full at fall and we started to ask them to go out to the pile to dump, because no one enjoys that, right? They'd rather just go over the pit and then get back to the farm and come back again. Some of the folks that were the first ones to gripe when we said, okay, you're going out to pile 2 this afternoon to dump your loads. They'd also be the first ones that would call and say, hey, when are y'all planning on picking up that pile? Because they had a truck sitting idle in the pole barn, and they knew we could put them to work for about 16, 18 hours a day for a week, and their son could drive, one of their farm hands could drive, whatever it is. But they keeping that asset, that rolling stock, in action and generating revenue for them during an off season. And so that, and like you said, that's an elastic supply factor. How much freight comes on the market, goes off the market at a given time of year. And then, of course, the advent of more fob business and cross-country trades and looking to go into different places. This seems like it solves an evolving and pretty persistent problem. Now, Jared, the business started as building this load board, this marketplace to facilitate that marriage of bulk product shippers and freight haulers. How has the business evolved over time? I assume that's not all you're doing these days. Then is just maintaining the board.
Yeah, it's crazy. So now we started BulkLoads in 2011. So we're coming on almost 15 years in business. And I guess now I'm in my 40s, so I have probably more time for reflection and kind of wondering the why. You don't realize it when you're in the trenches and running the business. But when we started BulkLoads, our goal was to have 1,000 members. And again, so BulkLoads, it's a SaaS business or subscription. So we have shippers, brokers, carriers. They all pay a membership or a subscription to get on there. Well, my business partner, Matt, and I, and again, Matt, I didn't mention him earlier. I was kind of more the face of the company, or still am. And Matt was kind of the back-end developer, but our goal was to get 1,000 members. Well, within 2 years, we hit 1,000 members, and it was like, okay, well, can we get up to 1,500 or 2,000 members? Today, we're proud to say that we serve over 7,000 carriers, shippers, and brokers in the marketplace, and continue to grow. But for us, it was just, and this is, you learn this in Business 101, and it was like, what are your customers continuing to tell you that they want or they need or whatever? And in 2013, and actually even after that, after we started running BulkLoads, we had a lot of companies coming on saying, Jared, we love your product, we love BulkLoads, but hey, who do you recommend to help me with factoring? And if you don't know what factoring is, it's just getting your money quicker. There's some companies out there, I won't name specifics, but typically your larger grain companies, not all, but typically the larger you get, the slower they pay. They just, like said, there's financial decisions they make to say, hey, if we can slow down payment on our payables, obviously, we can use that cash to deploy in other areas. I won't go into that. So we saw an opportunity to say, hey, could we do that for our carriers? I mean, could we create a factoring company that's really better out there than the market and serves our industry? So we started Smart Freight Funding in 2014. That company's based up in Omaha, Nebraska. So it's a sister company of ours. So we saw an opportunity there. We brought in, actually, it was a lady who I worked with at Bartlett Grain, Rachel Biesterfeld, to kind of really run the operations. And we used BulkLoads as kind of the marketing funnel. And what was crazy when we started that in 2014, you're trying to gauge, how many people would be interested in the product or service. I can't remember specifically, but it was like within 2 months, we were growing so fast, and it's a very cash intensive business because you're quick paying cash and then waiting on the companies to receive that back. But we literally had to take down all advertising on that business within a couple months because we ran out of cash. We couldn't, I can't remember the credit line, but we had lent out so much that we said, oh my gosh, there's so many people needing this. But yeah, today we've grown that. I think we serve close to 2,500 or 3,000 carriers on that business, continue to grow it. But we just realized that, and talking about the why, you look back, so many of these trucking companies, I said, these small 5 or less trucking companies, first off, like I said, they can't, trucking is a very cash intensive business. You don't realize, but that truck, that trailer, the fuel, the insurance and all that, you got so much money already in your costs before you're ever getting that check back. A lot of times these trucking companies, it's costing 95 cents for every dollar that they're getting back. That's just how much. So you got to think, if I'm spending 95 cents for every dollar I'm spending and I'm waiting 3 weeks, that's a lot of money that I got out on there. So we just realized that so many of our core members on BulkLoads really needed a product or service like factoring.
Poorly executed mergers and acquisitions destroy more value than they create. They can set your company back years. To defend your firm's position in the marketplace, you need access to the leading practices that unlock the greater potential of your people, processes, and systems. If you are undertaking a company transformation or pursuing an acquisition as a vehicle to grow, set up a call with Joe by visiting www.moshercg.com.
Just to go back to that whole concept of the slow pay, it's born of, for folks that haven't maybe thought about this directly, it's working capital optimization, right? If you can extend your terms whereby you pay, so we're going to pay you at 120 days after invoicing, right? But you can shorten your receivables, saying you used to collect at 90 and you're collecting at 60. You effectively hold more cash captive in your business to support ongoing operations. Really to lay off some of that cash crunch that you talked about when Smart Freight funding was launched and you guys grew so quickly and you kind of ran out of runway. And so it sort of replicated some of the challenges that they have. It's not an illogical business decision to say, let's perhaps extend our payables and shorten our receivables and keep more cash in the business. But it does have knock-on effects to your supply chain partners, your customers, your suppliers, your partners, et cetera. And so I think it's interesting that you looked at that and said, okay, well, that's also a friction that maybe doesn't need to exist, or we have not a solution, but a temporary remedy to that. We can quick pay some of these folks. And, directionally speaking, Jared, those 2,500, give or take, Smart Freight carrier customers, are they generally all subscribers to your load board marketplace as well? Or do you have some folks that are looking for quick pay outside of your marketplace system?
Yeah, great question. So for us, I would almost say 98% of our companies that are on factoring are BulkLoads subscribers or users. There may be some that, a couple examples, there may be some that they're on BulkLoads, but they know other guys in the industry that can benefit, so they recommend friends over. And we've even had BulkLoads subscribers that were in Hopper that moved to another sector of trucking. So now they're pulling flatbeds or dry vans, which we don't cater, but they're still using our factoring because of the customer service and value that we presented to them.
So the Smart Freight side of the business, the factoring is more agnostic to industry and load type, whereas BulkLoads is specifically bulk truck commodity. Okay. And so this is, I'm guessing there's other examples as well, but it's interesting here, the notion that the product being BulkLoads, the load board at this point, the initial product now kind of becomes a funnel whereby people sign up for load board and subsequently sign up for Smart Freight and any additional services that you may be providing as well. How do you see this continuing to evolve? Is there more opportunity out there to extend the services, or is there a logical point where you say, you know what, we're going to keep to our core capabilities and we're not going to go too far afield? How do you look at that challenge?
Yeah. So I'll go back to just listening to your customers. I want to say this, and this is more on a personal, I think I've realized as I've gotten older, like I love the challenge, but at the heart of me, I love to create and try to build new things. And, I don't like to ever use the word that I'm an entrepreneur, but I like to say that I'm a creator. I love to create and see if there's opportunity to create. And again, for our industry, I grew up in small town USA. I said small farming community. I was one of 5 children and watched my parents kind of grow up. I mean, poor, humble, fighting week to week. So I just want to say I've always had a passion to help those people. And again, those make up a lot of our trucking industry too. So a lot of what we do, especially in the ag hopper industry, it's a lot of small town, rural. The dad drives the truck, mom's doing the paperwork, got kids running that business. So I've always had just I would just say a heart to really help these companies. But yeah, fast forward, one thing we saw, we had factoring going, but as we continue to evolve and digitization got in, and I would say even, you talk about COVID, which is now, it doesn't get mentioned that much, but we started realizing that a lot of these shipping companies, especially in the grain space, and especially cross-country trading companies, they wanted to get the tickets back quicker. So let's just say prior to even 2018, 2019, the typical process for these trucking companies, they would haul load, they get a scale ticket, bill lading at the origin, they deliver it, they get, scale ticket, bill lading at destination. Prior to 2019, 20, it's just funny to even say this, that it wasn't that long ago. Those trucking companies would have to physically mail all of those documents in order to get paid. for it. So they would have to sit there and, most of those trucking companies, they would wait till the end of the week, Friday, they get home, and then spend Saturday putting all those tickets together, creating the invoice, and then mailing it to, let's say, ADM or Cargill or Bartlett or whoever it is. And then you got to wait on the mail for it to get there. Then they get it. And then hopefully, depending on how long they pay, their terms of service. So, but you just had, and then some of these trucking companies too, they would put it all together in a big packet, and overnight at FedEx, it's spending $20-$25 to send all this. And here's the funny thing is, like, a lot of these grain companies, again, and I'm not bad about it, like, if you're used to doing one thing this way, you've always done it, I'm not going to do it any other way. So a lot of these grain companies, like, we have to have originals. This is the only way we're going to pay, Betty in back office. I'm not making fun of Betty, but, like, this is the only way Betty's going to pay the invoice, Well, COVID hits. And then some of these companies also saw that, hey, the technology's out there where, most of these truckers have smartphone devices. They can take a legible picture of a ticket, or there's some of these apps out there that can really scan the documents well. So we saw this revolution or push of digitization in there. So I say all that, we saw the opportunity to say, hey, we need to jump on board. We need to create the solutions and technology to do that. 2019, we pushed out, it's called Bulk TMS. TMS stands for Transportation. And there's others out there, but we wanted to be the one to say, hey, we want to create one for our bulk space, something that shippers, brokers, and carriers can use. But basically creating a system where now, instead of taking all those physical documents, we can use an app that we've created these drivers can scan it. It all goes into a system or a dashboard where those shipping companies can go and see all those tickets, sell the tickets, they can reconcile them. And again, what we saw was, a lot of these shipping companies actually wanting that. They wanted that because, think about this. A lot of these shipping companies, if you're hauling or if you're moving feed and ingredients and all that, you can't invoice your customer until you get those documents in. So you want it in quicker, Yep. So COVID was a blessing that it really pushed a lot of this to say, well, I just say the reason why COVID is, a lot of people working remote. Well, now Betty would have to go into the office to get the tickets and all that. Well, hey, let's just do all this electronically. So we saw this really big push in the last really 5-6 years to get all these documents. But that's what started Bulk TMS, which is our transportation management system. I won't go into the details, but there's more than that. We now have developed technology where we can, shipping companies, they can see where the driver is, their ETA, so they can see it on a map. They can send dispatches out. So it's just, think about a system where you can pretty much manage all your truck freight in one spot.
Yeah. I love it. I appreciate it. And it just makes me think about, I did a stint of my career in a corporate audit role. And so it was all about ensuring that the proper controls were placed at points of potential value leakage, fraud, etc. And there was always this mindset around, is the business following a specific process? Meaning, are they retaining their scale tickets? Do they have paper copies before they will ever approve payment? Or do they have a process by which they can verify that the payment that they're about to submit is appropriate? And if necessary, could they get additional information to support it? Meaning, waiting for a paper ticket is one form of verification. It's not the only form of verification. And so these digital solutions that allow you to get a digital copy of that ticket, it doesn't mean you couldn't request a paper ticket in the future if you needed it. Right? It's not a binary set of choices. And what's funny is these things happen. You get used to using those digital tickets for a while, and suddenly no one has any idea where the originals are kept because the actual digital solution has worked. There hasn't been excessive fraud or value leakage or errors, etc. And so I think it's a good opportunity using something like the pandemic. What do they say? Never let a good crisis go to waste. You actually use a disruptive event like that to drive necessary changes in the business. Speaking of disruptive events, let me shift gears here for a moment outside the business to talk about the market overall and then maybe what that might do to your business. But we're at a moment right now in 2025 where I'd say we're in a moment of convergence. And by that, I mean, the acceleration of AI or artificial intelligence, autonomy, which is, of course, a version of AI, but it sort of sometimes falls into its own bucket itself. And then also just more advanced robotics. And few things in this convergence are more captivating for folks than self-driving vehicles. And that includes trucks. You know, the trucking business, as I look at it, and I was obviously not as deep into it as you are, Jared, but it's structurally just ripe with constraints. You know, for a while, there was maybe asset constraints around how many available vehicles were there. That doesn't usually seem to be the problem right now. From my experience, it's largely the labor. You know, do we have skilled, qualified, licensed labor that's available and willing to do the work? Or is that labor distributed to the areas where we need it? You have some places in western Kansas at certain times of the year that there's drivers lining up for loads, and other places in the I-states where you can't find a driver for days, right? So you don't have an equal distribution of labor. And then you have things like the hours of driving requirements per day, right? Sometimes people just time out. So you've got the person, you've got the willingness to work, they're credible and licensed, but they just can't, you know, for regulatory reasons, can't continue to drive, et cetera. So self-driving could help remove that human constraint to the business. But before I ramble on anymore, how do you look at that convergence and specifically vehicle autonomy and self-driving? And what's the potential within the bulk shipment trucking space?
Yeah, that's a really big question, Joe. And it's, it keeps getting closer and closer to try to figure out how this plays, autonomous driving, AI, you name it, in the industry. You know, even in the last 10 years, how we've gone warp speed into technology and trucking. You think about ELDs, electronic logging devices, and those were something that was really frowned upon and government passed a mandate where all trucks had to have electronic logging devices, in 2017. Today you talk to most people, I'm not saying all, but most people really now see the value in those. And that what that is, and just for the people listening that may not know, it's a device that goes in these trucks that can track the hours of service, but it's become much more than that. It's a data provider. You can now use those devices to track the truck, to see the diagnostics on the truck, the fuel mileage. I mean, there's just so many cool things now that these companies can do. That's been an enhancement. It hasn't been a debilitation, and it's actually probably made trucking so much more efficient. Now, there'll be people that argue on that one, but yeah, that's just one thing that, again, the industry was so resistant of that, especially the big fleets were not, but the small owner operators, which again make up a large group, were so resistant. There's some out there, but most of the guys I talked to today, now it's a part of their business that they use to help make decisions on how those trucks run. So I say all that, again, talking about autonomous driving and AI, I think, again, it's going to be something that just, continues to get pushed in there with efficiency, with safety. I think what we're seeing, and again, you're not really seeing in our space, it's more where you're seeing autonomous driving. There's been reports now, especially like in Texas and roads that were kind of more longer hauls straight, probably less accidents. You're seeing some of this autonomous driving going on. So you're always going to see it probably more in that general space, the drive-ins and all that. There is an argument to where, how long before you see it more in bulk where, can we get there? But, the truck that's going to 100-year-old feed mill and having to go over railroad tracks and around and all that. I mean, that's where our industry, again, I think there's just a lot more variables involved with that. But yeah, I think you're going to see it continue to be adopted. And again, if it's something, again, that can move technology and humanity and safety and think of all that, again, I just look at it as something that the industry's, that's going to happen.
Let's forecast this in the future. And then I want to share my point of view on this as well, but is greater autonomous vehicle utilization within the bulk commodity space, is that a threat to a load board solution like you have right now? Or does the load board actually become even more valuable because these haulers have more vehicles. They can go to more places. Those restraints around hours of operation, labor availability have been removed. How do you look at that sort of conceptually as a threat or opportunity within your business model?
Yeah, great question. And something we probably think about all the time, is, and you think about the load board concept, what we do, like even when we started the load board, there wasn't a lot of social media now. And again, just think about the way people connect. But, before us, we even had people saying like, wow, I could find somebody in California that I never knew existed. Well, now you got, just name the social media apps that people can get on. So we do think about that all the time of like, hey, how do we evolve to continue to be a valuable service out there? And I think, a couple ways. I think there's always going to be continued, new people coming into the industry that's going to need to figure out, hey, how do I get started? And I think that's where we become extremely valuable because, again, think about this. So, and I worked as a shipper. If I'm a brand new company coming out of the ranks, and again, you're going to have new people that's got to come in and fill the gaps of the people that are retiring and the new trucking companies. But if I'm a new company, like, can I just call Bartlett Grain and talk to figure out, and maybe you could, or could I get on a board and figure out where freight's moving and kind of start that introduction that way? Because if a guy just called me, this was 15 years ago, said, hey, I'm out in Kansas. I'm like, okay, well, let me see, I'll let you know. But if I had a load out there that I'm needing to move and somebody calls me specifically, that's much more engaging, if that makes sense. I like there's a reason why, so I think the load board will always serve that purpose. The other thing that we're looking at is like, hey, how do we become better at, really utilizing our data and technology and AI to help these companies? So, let's just say, for example, for some of the stuff we're looking at, if I'm a new company and, instead of just going on there looking at a list of loads, he can say, hey, I'm based out of, let's just say Seneca, Kansas again. What's my best opportunity here? If I'm wanting to run within a 100-mile radius. Well, based on all this data we've collected over the years, we can give them a really good layout and say, hey, based on what you're looking for, based on this data, based on these loads that have history more, like, hey, here's the top 3 companies that you need to be contacting, whether that be AGP, Bartlett, whatever. So I say all that, like, we're looking now like, hey, how do we utilize technology and our data to really help these guys with what they're looking at? Because again, if you really think about it, Joe, that guy's not looking for a load. He's looking for an opportunity, a business relationship. He's looking to grow. There may be those onesie twosies, but like, that's what we're trying to solve. It's like, so it's really framing up of like, hey, what's our customer that's paying us? What are they really looking for? And really solving for that. And I think that's where I see, honestly, more opportunity for us, especially with the density of carriers and shippers that we have in our ecosystem. Super exciting.
Yeah, very much so. I love the idea that, what are they actually looking for? It's, the whole adage around, someone goes in the hardware store wanting to buy a hammer. They don't want a hammer. They want a hole in the wall. They're trying to hang something up on the wall. The hammer's the way they get there. And so the person doesn't want to hire a hauler necessarily. They want 5,000 bushels of grain sitting in Seneca to be in Kansas City tomorrow. That's what they want. The truck is the literal vehicle by which that happens. And I think that kind of thinking can also sort of de-risk the threats of AI. So if I think about this, and this is going to be kind of a rough concept here, but the load board as a business construct is a way that you pool the supply and demand. You aggregate all those demand signals of all those shippers that need something to move, and you pool it with the supply, meaning all those haulers can go in and post their availability. They can participate and compete for loads, etc. But you've created this pool, so it's somewhat, the information flows into a centralized repository where it lives for a period of time. Transactions are made, and then it's pulled out of that pool. With AI, with agentic AI, where you may have, you have bots on the shipper side and on the hauler side that are constantly out there communicating with each other. Suddenly the load board is not necessarily value additive. It's more, can you facilitate the plumbing of where all those AI agents are actually speaking to the market? That's still an opportunity. I don't exactly technically know how that's structured, but an opportunity to own those communication channels and that plumbing to say, look, we can make sure that you have access into all the shippers. So you can actually, as a hauler, perhaps signal the direct supply you have of freight and say, based on your previous activity, your past activity, based on what we know about crop production, crop conditions, demand signals elsewhere, we're going to actively be prompting you and saying, hey, we've got the freight, should this be ready to haul? And it still seems like there's a place for not necessarily a traditional intermediary that slows it down, but a market facilitator to continue to support that. And so I think that's pretty exciting. Kind of going back to the autonomous vehicle side, this is easy for me to say because I don't drive a truck and nobody in my family drives a truck, but I don't see autonomy within the ag space as a huge threat right now, just given what I know about the relative labor scarcity of drivers and the secular trend down into the right around driver availability into the future. Folks that have been doing this for a long time that are very skilled at it are not getting any younger. We're not seeing replacement rate in the labor pool that we'd like to see. We typically have to pull labor from in communities and environments and jurisdictions that aren't, rich in population and population growth as it is. And so there's this structural threat on the horizon around labor availability to move these goods. And so autonomy solves for that. Where I think it actually is to the benefit of those drivers right now is, and tell me if I'm wrong here, if this is too simplified in my thinking, Jared, but we're moving agricultural or bulk commodities from the farm gate to a processor, to a terminal, to a feed mill is almost the opposite of an Amazon or a Walmart distribution center or DC trying to move product to their stores, right? There's no standardization in layout at origin or destination. There's no floating docks. These are not clean pallet loads. There's no guarantee of the road conditions. There's not standard egress or ingress into the properties. You have product that can go out of condition. And so I feel like all those are almost, they're solvable, but they are edge cases when it comes into autonomous freight movement. And I just feel like that's going to take a lot longer to solve. And my bet would be that would be not the first thing that an autonomous freight solution at scale is looking to solve for. They're probably going after the quote unquote easier use cases of container shipments, pallet loads, maybe in town or shorter distance over the road, in and out of DCs, things like that. Any thoughts around that? Is that how you're looking at it as well, or what did I miss?
No, Joe, I think you're exactly right. Because what kept coming to mind was organized chaos when you talk to a lot of these feed mills and pet food manufacturers and all that. But there's just, I think there's ways for it to get better. Don't get me wrong, there's always ways to improve. But there's so many complexities of the supply and demand and trucks coming in from so many different locations and trying to schedule, 100 loads at one mill to be unloaded in one day. Again, there's ways to keep making that better, especially for the carrier that's delivering in there. But yeah, there's so much more complexities versus delivering to a warehouse dock and even an automated forklift unloading something out of there. And again, you're talking about, grain, which has a shelf life, that's going into animals that are, there's highs and lows and when feed rations go up and down. So yeah, so many more complexities we are dealing with agriculture.
Well, super fascinating business, Jared. Love the thought process and the approach and sort of working from the solution back, sort of all these timeless business lessons we hear again and again, but it's nice to have an illustrative example that's still relatively young, right? So the business has been around for a while now, but in the arc of history, it's still a young business. You do a podcast as well, and I mentioned that at the start. Tell us a bit more about that. The name of the program, what it's all about. How folks can learn more about that.
Yeah, so I've really shifted more into that role. I don't say I'm out of the business, but I spend more of my time content creation and podcasting, and I do it for a variety of reasons. We started the BulkLoads podcast, which if you go anywhere where podcasts are played, you can watch. But we've also even moved probably even more into our YouTube channel on YouTube videos, and I'll tell you why. But going back to the podcast, we started that in 2018 to really be a voice out there. Again, we knew podcasts were going to continue to grow, and we knew specifically we had an audience, trucking companies, that out of everything had a lot of time to listen. So why not be a voice out there that we could create a podcast? So we started releasing one show every week. It was called Everything Bulk Freight Trucking. So we brought on, and we still do today, different guests and different aspects of everything that we can really cover to help our listeners really gain value in content. But really, a couple of years ago, we saw that really the next wave of adoption and what our market was telling us that like a lot of these companies wanted to see video. So we started doing video on our podcast, but more importantly, we started going out and telling the stories of our customers. So I spend a lot of time now traveling all over this beautiful country. Actually, as we're doing this podcast, we're leaving this week to go out to Utah for a couple of days, and we're going to do some filming out there. But really going behind the scenes of our customers and telling their story. What you think about it in a podcast, you're still going to gain so much value. I mean, they're going to tell the story of how they got there, but all the steps that they took, the decisions they made. And again, it's been one of the most rewarding things that I've been able to do. And the cool thing about this is just like podcasts and our YouTube channel, we can really broadcast out to a lot bigger audience, especially on YouTube, and really tell that story. And I think we do it in such a beautiful way. Again, yeah, we'll put a plug here and there about BulkLoads, but we kind of have this philosophy of, one of our videographers, Joe, talks about Red Bull. Well, if you look at all the Red Bull events and even Red Bull commercials, they never really talk about drinking Red Bull. But you just assume that, hey, these people that are interacting doing that, they drink Red Bull. So we tell the stories of our customers. And our goal is hopefully people, like I said, if we can be of value to them, whether it's our load board, whether it's our factoring, we didn't talk about, but we also have an insurance group. We also have a fuel card and other services. But yeah, if we can be of value to those, that's really our goal. But I think I'll just end on this. For me, Joe, personally, like it's been one of the most rewarding things. I never thought I would be, I love being a podcast host, but now I feel, I don't want to compare myself to Mike Rowe, but like going out and telling the story and really vlogging and man, it's just so powerful. We did one just yesterday, and I can't tell you how fulfilling it is to go and talk with that CEO. The one yesterday I did, he was the second generation, but he goes back into his office and starts showing pictures of his dad and his dad starting the company, these old trucks, and how hard his dad worked and some of the wisdom. And oh my gosh, it's just so beautiful to tell those stories. So, and we get a lot of feedback. We have people from not even in trucking that they say they love watching our YouTube videos just because of the story that we tell. But yeah, for your listeners out there, if you go to YouTube or just search BulkLoads, if you go to any podcast app, search BulkLoads, and you can find us on there. I always say clicks to the subscribe button, but it's really cool. I mean, it's a lot of trucking companies that anything in agriculture we cover. So, we're going out this week and you'll see it on there, but yeah, we're going to do one of the largest fertilizer companies in this country, and we're going to go film some footage out there. So yeah, it's just like, if you have any interest in where your food comes from, any interest in agriculture, you will find extreme value in these videos.
That's wonderful. And I'll make sure we have links in the show notes to all of that, Jared. And I can say personally, I share the never once thought that I would spend any time doing this type of activity you and I are doing here today. I really see it as a service to the industry, and it's almost like you're aggregating perspectives. And again, the idea of pooling these perspectives for the folks that want them and know they need them, and other folks that maybe not know that they need them, and they stumble into it, and how that ripples out, and when folks consume it, and who it helps at the time that they need it. You don't ever really know, but based on the feedback that we get and the feedback that you're getting, I just think it's highly additive to our industry, to our economy, to our rural communities that we serve. And it really helps people out. And so it's important. It's important these things are happening. So thank you for doing it. And also, I just want to say thank you again for taking the time to join us today. I know you said you got a busy travel schedule, and so it means a lot that you sat down with me today. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure, Joe. Thanks for having me on. Been an honor.
You bet. Very good. Well, thank you again for joining us and being part of the Pacesetter Pod. And real quick to our listeners, thank you as always for tuning into today's episode. I hope and I trust that you found something not just of interest, but of actionable value in our conversation. And if you did, I ask you to do one thing. Please consider sharing this episode with someone that you think would also find benefit. It's the very best way you can support the show and help us elevate thinking around strategy execution all across the ag supply chain. Thanks again. I look forward to having you join us next time right here on the Pacesetter Pod.
This is the podcastfactory.com.